Herb Cohen, the author of the classic best-selling book, You Can Negotiate Anything, calls the world a giant negotiating table. When I read this, I imagine looking across a long table at all the faces of people I work with. My department chair, my dean, members of committees I run, my students, my community partners, my research colleagues in Australia, the United Kingdom, Norway, my banker, real estate agent, cell phone salesperson, and the faces of all the people that I play with but still negotiate about what and when to play. Friends, spouses, kids. It's truly a large table. And rightfully so. Negotiations happen around us all the time. Some proceed quickly and easily. Others drag on, and everyone gets angry. Getting what you deserve out of a negotiation and having everyone walk away satisfied is a specific application of influence. Like all influence situations, doing it well is a combination of art and science that can have profound implications for you, your coworkers, and even society at large. In this lecture, I want to talk about how you can use influence successfully in negotiation settings. By successful, I don't just mean you get what you want, but that you and your negotiating partner walk away feeling satisfied that the results are fair. How can we get to fair as an outcome of negotiation? Let me walk you through a classic negotiation exercise, one that is used in business schools, classrooms, all around the world. Imagine you're sitting in an executive training program, and the professor divides the class into two groups. Your group is shepherded into a separate room and given a briefing sheet to read. Here's a summary. You are Dr. Jones, a biological research scientist employed by a pharmaceutical company. You have recently developed a synthetic chemical useful for curing a disease contracted by pregnant women. If not dealt with in the first 4 weeks of pregnancy, the disease causes serious damage to the unborn child. Unfortunately, the serum is made from a very rare fruit. Only about 4,000 were grown in the world this season. You have recently been told that a Mr. Cardoza, a South American fruit exporter, has 3,000 of these fruit. If you could obtain all 3,000, then you could make enough serum from the juice to both cure all the present victims and inoculate all remaining pregnant women. You have a budget. It's $250,000. Of course, you aren't the only one seeking those fruit. One Dr. Rolland is also urgently hoping to get these fruit from Mr. Cardoza. Dr. Rolland is employed by a competing pharmaceutical company. Rolland's been working on biological warfare research for the past several years. Before approaching Cardoza, you decide to talk to Dr. Rolland. With that briefing, you walk back into your classroom and are paired with another student who plays the role of Dr. Rolland. How do you begin your negotiation? What do you say, and what do you not say in trying to secure the 3,000 very rare fruit? If you're like many students, you begin with a somewhat guarded but very passionate explanation of why your need is so great. You are, after all, trying to prevent birth defects. To your surprise, Dr. Rolland also offers a plea for the fruit and has an equally great cause. She is actually trying to create an antidote to a neurological toxin that is leaking from a chemical weapons site and threatening innocent lives. So who gets the fruit? Many negotiating pairs have a hard time reaching agreement, as it turns out that each needs more than half of the fruit for a meaningful cause. Splitting them in half means that neither party gets what it needs. There is a surprising resolution to this case, but I'm not going to give it to you right now. Instead, I'm going to wait until the end of the lecture to revisit Dr. Jones and Dr. Rolland. In the meantime, I'd like to explore some of the strategies that the doctors might use to influence each other in their negotiation. Influence and negotiation have much in common, but they're not precisely the same thing. There's an important difference between negotiation settings and the many different examples of influence we've used earlier in the course. In a negotiation, people generally come together with the express purpose of reaching an agreement, and thus it's a concentrated time and space within which a variety of different influence tactics get applied. And it's a time when people are acutely aware that they're being subjected to influence, so they're often guarded. In their book, Getting to Yes, Roger Fisher and William Ury identify two broad negotiation strategies, which they call principle-based negotiation and position-based negotiation. Fisher and Ury also describe three criteria that we should use to determine whether a negotiation tactic is successful. First, it results in a settlement that's agreeable to both parties. Two, it's efficient. And three, the parties are willing to work together again. When these three things happen, we'll call it a win-win. Both parties walk away having won. So the question becomes, which general strategy, principle-based or position-based, is more conducive to achieving a win-win outcome? Let's see each in operation. Let's start with position-based negotiation. Position-based negotiation occurs when each party focuses on a concrete position that must be obtained. In the case of the rare fruit in your role as Dr. Jones, you might make Dr. Rowan an offer, asking her not to seek the fruit if you give her $100,000. That's effectively a cost of $100,000 for all 4,000 fruit produced worldwide. You might offer this knowing that you actually have $250,000 to spend and only need 3,000 fruit. You've left yourself wiggle room to be talked down or influenced into paying a bit more or buying a bit less. But in the end, you know you won't settle for any position that costs more than $250,000 and results in fewer than 3,000 fruit in hand. You're focused on the numbers. Back in the real world, you might use the same approach when trying to buy a car. You might refuse to pay any more than $10,000 for a used car that you've been looking at. In the case of home buying, it may be that a seller refuses to pay any of the settlement costs and focuses all the negotiation on making sure that all cash costs of the sale are covered by the buyer. If a young man walks into a store and offers a lowball price for a refrigerator, saying, "If you can't sell this to me for $450, then I am leaving," he's using position-based negotiating. In each case, a fixed concrete monetary position is established that leads the person to see any outcome of the negotiation as either a win, I got what I wanted, or a loss, I failed. So position-based negotiation also has been called a win-lose approach. When people adopt this approach, you can inadvertently cut off potentially creative solutions, and one person almost always walks away frustrated. The end result is often, although certainly not always, no deal. I've seen that happen in house buying. When my wife and I made a very good monetary offer on a house in our neighborhood, we attached a contingency. The seller refused the contingency, and we countered by giving in even more in terms of convenience of closing date and cost. The seller still refused, focused solely on that single contingency. We decided to build our own version of that house a bit further down the street. Because of the seller's sole focus on a single position, no contingency, they did not sell the house for over a year. We were nearly ready to move into our new house when they finally sold. The influence tactics used in position-based negotiation can vary, but they easily fall into hard tactics like pressure. When you get caught up in a particular number issue, then you may find yourself frustrated that the other party won't just give in, and your frustration comes out in loudly stated demands or even ultimatums. Let's contrast this with principle-based negotiation. This approach involves exploring each party's underlying interests and seeking solutions that are mutually beneficial. Rather than pressure, a focus on interest pushes people to soft influence tactics, rational argument, inspiration, and exchange. In the case of the home we tried to purchase, it would have been helpful if we had understood why the sellers were so averse to that particular contingency, and if they knew why we wanted to have it in place. Perhaps there was a creative way that both of our concerns could have been addressed. Real-world examples of principle-based negotiation occur all the time. The one that I'd like to focus on involves two electricity providers on the West Coast in the United States. One of the providers, the Bonneville Power Administration, is a federal nonprofit agency that markets wholesale power from 31 hydroelectric projects in the Pacific Northwest. The other provider, Southern California Edison, relies on nuclear, hydro, and coal-fired facilities to deliver energy to customers in Central and Southern California. In the early 1990s, each organization had environmental problems. Bonneville had problems with their hydroelectric plants reducing water flow too much. To make sure water was available to generate electricity for heating in the fall and winter months, Bonneville would block water behind their dams during spring and summer. The end result was enough electricity year-round, but dangerously low water flow for salmon migration during spring and summer. It was looking like a win-lose situation with the salmon, environmentalists, and the local fishing lobby all on the losing side. Meanwhile, further south along the U.S. coast, Southern California Edison had problems with their coal plants, adding smog to the already murky Los Angeles skies. They were looking for ways to cut back on how much coal they burned, but they also didn't want to create power shortages. So they started to negotiate with other power suppliers in order to purchase power in the spring and summer when hot weather leads to peak energy demands in Southern California. Doing so would allow them to reduce coal burning at those times. It turns out that there was a solution to both Bonneville and Edison's problems that only required a creative mindset and a little bit of trust. By allowing extra water release in the spring and summer, and generating surplus power at that time, Bonneville was able to lend that power to Edison. Edison then reduced its use of coal-fired plants during that time, which reduced emissions that contribute to smog, especially in the hot months. Now, later in the year, when Bonneville no longer had enough water behind their dams to spin their turbines, and the summer smog had started to dissipate, Edison could fire up its plants and return the electricity they borrowed from Bonneville. In the end, this cost effectively no money, and the environmental benefits up and down the West Coast were extensive. So here we have a classic example of principle-based negotiation. The parties arrived at a creative win-win solution. If the companies had been solely focused on money when they started negotiating, they could have fought for months over pricing. Instead, by bringing to the table environmental concerns and the question of timing, they were able to create a truly win-win solution. What leads people to come together with an approach to be creative and help each other solve problems? We have to remember that behind these big company names are managers with past history negotiating, with personalities and with biases. The ATTIC model reminds us that these characteristics of agents play a role in what influence tactics they'll use. Research indicates that one of the most important agent characteristics leading to principle-based negotiation is having confidence. Research by Brandon Sullivan, Kathleen O'Connor, and Ethan Burris suggests that people who have confidence that they can establish rapport, find trade-offs, and exchange concessions tend to be much more likely to begin negotiations with the principle win-win approach. As with any effort to build confidence, the best advice I can offer is to practice. You can build confidence by doing further reading and reflection, and then applying principle-based tactics anytime you can, with family, with friends, and even with that annoying mattress salesperson who keeps pushing the pillow top model. That will help you gain confidence, which in turn will enable you to seek win-win solutions in more complex negotiations. The addict model also reminds us that context matters. In the case of negotiations, a turbulent past history that creates animosity and reduces trust makes it unlikely that creative solutions will emerge. If Bonneville Power Authority and Southern California Edison had had prior conflicts in the courts, then executives from the firms might not have trusted each other enough to agree. And what they agreed upon was the very first environmentally focused power exchange ever. A more personal setting in which conflict and lack of trust plays out is in divorce proceedings. Couples who are saddled with frustration and lack of trust are usually unwilling to openly discuss issues, to consider any concessions, and to propose win-win solutions. So, confidence and a trusting relationship help lead to principle-based negotiating and to win-win outcomes. Let's return to position-based negotiation and see how the addict model helps us understand when it occurs. Beginning with context, research suggests that time pressure can contribute to the use of position-based negotiation. Under pressure, it's more difficult to take the time to exchange information, to consider alternatives, and ultimately find a mutually beneficial solution. Technology may also play an important contextual role, leading to position-based negotiation. In a study conducted at Tel Aviv University, researchers found that people negotiating via email used fewer soft and more hard tactics than those working face-to-face. So if you're negotiating via technology, such as trying to buy a car online, you'll be more likely to see hard tactics pop up. These may help you get a good deal today, or might help the dealer take advantage of you, but keep in mind the trade-off for future business. If you want to have a good working relationship in the future, soft tactics associated with principle-based negotiation should be your choice and the choice of the business you're working with. So, we've considered context and noted how time pressure and technology can lead to win-lose approaches to negotiation. Now, let's talk about the agent characteristics that are associated with this approach. A personal characteristic that may lead to a preference for position-based negotiation is competitiveness. In the United States, we often point to lawyers as the quintessential example. In the U.S., legal education often socializes law students to be competitive to the point of aggressiveness. While not all lawyers in the U.S. are like this, when the educational system attracts competitive students and further develops argumentative approaches to winning, the end result is a tendency for lawyers to adopt a style that is position rather than principle-based. If you think I'm overgeneralizing, let me quote an article written by law professor Andrea Kupfer-Schneider and published in the Harvard Negotiation Law Review. Quote, "Few law students are afraid of being too adversarial. Given the choice between being too soft and too hard, most lawyers would opt for being too hard. Law school provides an opportunity to modify this trend, but teaching methodology still used by some first-year professors appears quite adversarial to students. It is combat." But the news is not all bad for lawyers. In the same article, Professor Schneider goes on to report survey results from over 700 lawyers in the Milwaukee and the Chicago areas. Results reveal that lawyers generally believe in being principled in negotiations. In other words, they believe that seeking win-win solutions and cooperating are more effective than competing and pushing to maximize settlements. So there's good reason to hope that attitudes are changing. In addition to competitiveness, what other agent characteristics might lead one to choose position-based negotiation over principle-based approach? What about culture? In an earlier lecture, we discussed the difference between individualists and collectivists. Individualists are concerned with their own goals and interests and place them above the interests of the group. Collectivists, on the other hand, are concerned with the goals and interests of the group and place them above their own interests as individuals. Given these definitions, it might seem obvious that individualists would be more prone to position-based negotiation. The truth is a bit more complicated. Michelle Gelfand from the University of Maryland and Anu Rialo from the University of Tartu in Estonia conducted a study to see whether culture influenced negotiation process and outcomes. Were individualists more competitive, less willing to exchange information and make concessions? In a study of 102 undergraduate students, the answer was generally no. But that's not the whole story. In the study, the researchers manipulated whether the negotiators would be accountable for the outcome of the negotiation. In the high accountability condition, participants were told that they would have to justify their negotiated agreement to a manager. In the no accountability condition, participants were told that no one would evaluate their negotiation outcome. When both negotiators were individualists, they were indeed less cooperative, but only in the high accountability condition. In effect, the individualists chose to act less cooperatively when they knew they would be subsequently evaluated. Similarly, pairs who were collectivistic exhibited higher levels of cooperation when they knew they would be evaluated. So when people know that others are watching, they're more likely to behave consistently with the cultural expectation that they hold. These results offer an interesting recommendation for making high-profile negotiations more collaborative. In the United States, which is filled with individualists, high-profile negotiations are more likely to result in posturing and conflict. In the U.S., negotiations might be more collaborative if they are conducted privately. The results are revealed in a general fashion rather than a detailed fashion, where the point-by-point ideas might be laid out. Now, the opposite would be true when the parties are from countries with many collectivist citizens, like Venezuela, Pakistan, or South Korea. In these countries, having negotiations be more public and the results clearly enumerated should lead to more cooperation. In the Gelfand and Rialo study, and in our discussion of principle-based negotiation, we focused on pairs of negotiators who were similar in their approach. But clearly this doesn't always happen. What if a collectivist who relies on soft tactics and an individualist who leans towards hard tactics come together at a negotiating table? Perhaps more pointedly, what about a situation in which you are trying to be collaborative and the person you're negotiating with is doing nothing but playing hardball? If you're repeatedly making concessions in this situation and they're never reciprocated, then it does not make sense to continue. The end result won't be a win-win solution, just a miserable outcome for you. Early research on game theory and economics offers some insight into what one might do in such situations. Game theory is the study of strategic decision-making that analyzes conflict and competition between decision-makers. You may have heard of the prisoner's dilemma. It's the best known and probably best studied example of this type of game. The prisoner's dilemma game begins with the following setup. Two members of a criminal gang are arrested and imprisoned. Each prisoner is in solitary confinement with no means of speaking to or exchanging messages with the other. The police know they don't have enough evidence to convict the pair on the principal charge, so they plan to sentence both to a year in prison on a lesser charge. Simultaneously, the police offer each prisoner a deal. If he testifies against his partner, he'll go free, while the partner will get 3 years in prison on the main charge. Oh yes, there's a catch. If both prisoners testify against each other, both will be sentenced to 2 years in jail. When this game is played under most situations, betrayal is a common outcome. Not trusting the other party, not knowing what they're going to do, boy, a person is unwilling to risk getting 3 years while the other goes free. So, both people testify and get 2 years in jail. Another version of this classic game is the iterated version, where two players get multiple opportunities to collaborate or betray. In this case, it's more likely that at least some pairs will begin to collaborate. What is the best strategy in this game to maximize your outcome, if you're playing it with the prison version, to spend the least time in jail? Based on years of research, the tit-for-tat strategy has emerged as the best approach. This effectively means that you start off nice and then only defect after the other party does, effectively retaliating. But then you should proceed with a forgiving attitude and return to being nice. How might the tit-for-tat strategy be used in real-life negotiation contexts? Well, you could start with an effort to pursue principle-based strategies. But if it's clear that you're dealing with someone who's focused on positions, you should try to collect as much information as possible. Prepare yourself so you understand exactly what their limitations are. If, for example, you know what a car dealership paid for a car, having read a car buying guide, then you can counter tit-for-tat in a manner that gives you great possibility for a good outcome. When the salesperson says, "Boy, I can't let this car go for less than $19,000, you can counter with, because you did your research, "I understand that this car generally goes to you as the dealer for $18,000. And I'm more comfortable with a $500 profit on your end. But if the profit goes to $1,000, I have to tell you, I feel like I'm getting a bad deal." Knowing a reasonable figure to put back in play as part of this tit-for-tat exchange, you can have a real advantage that may help you get a good deal. Drawing on work by Roger Fisher and William Ury, I've presented the case for principle-based negotiation. It is fundamentally sound and should be your preferred approach to negotiation. It's more likely to happen if you're confident and hold back on any competitive instinct that you have. If you find yourself in a situation with someone who's quite competitive, then you can adopt the logic of the tit-for-tat strategy and alternate between hard and soft tactics depending on what your negotiating partner has done most recently. Let's return now to the situation of Dr. Rolland and Dr. Jones, our opening case. Recall that each was interested in obtaining all 3,000 of the rare fruit to help save lives. How can an agreement be reached that benefits both parties? Is there a principle-based solution? There is, if the right information is put on the negotiating table. Let's revisit the information given to each party. Dr. Jones was told, if you could obtain all 3,000, you could make enough serum from the juice to cure all the present victims and inoculate others. Dr. Rolland, whose instructions I did not read, was given somewhat different information. If you get all 3,000, you could make enough of the chemical from the fruit rind to neutralize all of the deadly gas. If Dr. Jones indicates, as part of the negotiation, that all he needs is the juice of the fruit, and Dr. Rolland indicates that all she needs is the rind, then it becomes clear that 3,000 fruit can be had by both. And the negotiation can begin to focus on how they can collaborate to make this win-win solution come to life. Now, clearly this is a case designed to have a relatively straightforward win-win solution. We do not always find ourselves in a situation where things work out so cleanly. But the point of the teaching exercise is that you won't know whether you're in such a situation unless you explore and discuss principles that underlie your requests. As always, let's end the lecture with two things you can try. First, the next time you enter a negotiation where you hope for a mutually agreeable solution, inquire into the other party's interests. Use words like we and us and see whether it creates a difference in the other party's approach. We discussed reciprocation in an earlier lecture, and your efforts to put forward a principle-based approach, to think about this as a collective endeavor, to seek a win-win, may well elicit the same from the other party. Second, the next time you hear an argument between two parties, listen carefully. Are the parties actually being clear about their interests, or are they caught up in defensive posturing and accusations? Don't intervene unless you're the parent or it's your job, but imagine what you might do if you were one of the parties. How could you break the cycle and begin a conversation about principles rather than positions? In our next lecture, we will conclude our course with a discussion of leaders. To be successful, leaders have to do all the things we've talked about so far in this course. Not just use influence tactics, but negotiate, sell, build positive impressions, and of course, make speeches. I'll present theory and stories just showing how some of the world's most amazing leaders make it all happen. I'll end by trying to convince you that none of this is reserved for an elite few. These are things you can do too.